Hey everyone, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, Ketty Nivyabandi. It's an honor to have tea time with you and gain insight into the human rights work you've done in your role as Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada, the English-speaking section. It's even more interesting to be sharing this conversation with you online with a Zoom audience while moderators are paying attention to the interests of the chat. It's a pleasure to meet you. And good afternoon, chat. My name is Taylor. I'm the sitting chair for the Regina Amnesty International Grassroots Volunteer Group. Our group, along with the Saskatoon group, engage in human rights activism throughout Saskatchewan, organizing events and supporting other human rights-minded affiliations in their activism. In pursuit of human rights, reconciliation in the lands called Canada, and a just society, I would like to acknowledge that our Amnesty Saskatchewan groups organize in Treaties 4 and 6 territories, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I want to take a moment to reflect on why land acknowledgement is important, not just for the beginning of a session like this or in ad breaks on the radio, as I've been hearing recently, but to genuinely contemplate what it means. The treaties are an agreement between the Indigenous peoples and the Canadian state to coexist on these traditional territories. And there is an undeniable history of harm caused by the Crown's acts of genocide against Indigenous peoples and bad faith violations of the treaties. I think about how in the 1880s, Edgar Dewdney was responsible for 2 residential schools in Saskatchewan, Battleford and Qu'Appelle, which he ordered to be implemented based on the 1879 Davin Report. Structurally, this classified these schools as industrial boarding schools staffed by members of the various churches with a half-day system, which is a curriculum of classes for half the day and child labor for the other half of the day. In 1886, Dewdney wrote that the increasing death rate of children in these schools was part of the price that First Nations had to pay to become civilized. I think about how the Qu'Appelle Residential School didn't close until 1998, 3 years after I was born. That's just one of the many reasons that while we discuss human rights work in Saskatchewan, we will be cognizant of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, in conjunction with the values of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, from which the foundation of Amnesty International was built. Ketty Nivyabandi. As an Amnesty volunteer, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. You inspire in many ways with the work that you do and how you empower people to have the fortitude and means to anchor in place for what is right, to believe in a path that will provide security and afford everyone their rights. Your poetry is evocative and tells your story better than any introduction I could articulate for the audience. But what I will say is that Ketty Nivyabandi studied international relations, is a former journalist and a published poet from Burundi. She led research, advocacy, and communication strategies with women peace activists across several conflict and post-conflict countries, including Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, Myanmar, Uganda, and Guatemala. Her expertise includes civic space in conflict and political transitions, and the global intersections of gender, race, and a feminist decolonial approach to human rights. Now, she is Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada. Ketty, what has the path of your lived experience been like getting to this point now where you oversee the domestic and international human rights mandate of Amnesty Canada?
Thank you so much, Taylor, for the wonderful introduction, for inviting me, and hello to everyone who's online. I want to start by sharing that I'm joining from the ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, where our offices are headquartered in Ottawa. To answer your question, I think that I caught the hunger for justice from my grandparents. Both my grandfathers were traditional judges. And my mother's father actually is notorious in my home country for having fought Belgian colonial rule at a time when, the ruling of the colonizers at the time was that Black people, Burundian people, and white people couldn't go to the same space at the same time. He was constantly, sort of challenging those norms. He would walk in and just bring people in. So he was always challenging injustice. And although I never met him, I kind of feel like I caught the bug from him. My parents were less of activists. However, I was raised by my mom, who was a single mother who had divorced quite early, which was quite revolutionary in Burundi at the time. Divorce remains not a very common thing to do in my home country. And I was raised by this independent woman, believing that women could do anything. And then when I grew up, I started realizing when I went to my friends' houses that things were not the same way in other households. So that obviously sort of sparked a question in me, why are things different there? Why are why are my friends who were girls expected to clean up after their brothers? Why were the fathers in those homes treated like kings and the mothers were like servants? I grew up with all those questions. And then I think a seminal moment for me, as I said, I grew up with a household of girls, my sister, my mother, and I. Everyone was a woman, even our dog was a female dog. And I always longed for a brother. And I had this cousin who was sort of that brother to me. He was that older brother to me. And he ended up being in 1993, when my country went into a civil war. He ended up being one of the first casualties of that civil war. He volunteered with the Red Cross. He was among the first people to volunteer to go and help, and he was brutally murdered. And his remains have still not been found. And I think that was a defining moment for me that also set me on the path to really seeking justice. Because my two questions at the time, I was obviously heartbroken, devastated, and my innocence was shattered. I didn't understand, first of all, why would anyone do that? So, and I still don't have an answer to that. But my second question was, how can anyone do that and get away with it? What happened to the people who did this? And that was my first real experience with impunity. And it really transformed everything that I did afterwards. I realized that maybe that's one area that I can work on, right? We can hold people accountable for the suffering that they cause. And so that set me on the path to, obviously, I studied international relations, as you said. I was initially interested in politics and then realized it was more interesting to hold politicians accountable. So I went into journalism, and then worked in many ways to always try and to hold power to account, to find the root causes of what was really creating suffering in society and act on it. And so I think what's interesting in my profile is that I have this blend of both activism, like street activism. In my country, I was extremely active before I came to Canada, mobilizing women to protest against our president who wanted to stay in office for an illegal third term. And so facing, policemen with guns and, water cannons and what have you. So really mobilizing in the streets, but also being able to mobilize, in advocacy meetings, in a boardroom, in, holding a politician to account. And I think that blend of strategies and tactics and understanding how the world sort of functions have helped me and slowly led me to this path. You've spoken about the role that I had before this one, but it's sort of all of this really led me to this position where I have the immense privilege of holding power to account in the myriads of ways, whether it's in the streets, whether it's in meetings with the Office of the Prime Minister, as we did a few days ago on Monday, or whether it's with talking to you, right? And our incredible members and activists. And I think it's that agility, that ability to work in different settings that, has prepared me for this role.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that story. Before I move on to ask Ketty another question, I just want to let the chat know that the chat is open for you guys to speak in it as you will, but there's also a question and answer portion where you can list all the questions you might want us to address, and we'll be paying attention to that. So you're welcome to enter that into the question and answer section. I asked a number of people I know what sort of question they would ask Ketty if given the chance, especially pertaining to the interests of people who live in Saskatchewan. And several topics came up, including a vague uncertainty about the specific work that Amnesty does. Could you share with us an overview of the methods Amnesty uses to act on certain issues, and explain why it might be common for people to feel as though maybe Amnesty is neglecting certain atrocities when it actually is doing work on those issues?
Yes, and that's an excellent question. The feeling sometimes that Amnesty may be neglecting some issues actually even occurs within Amnesty. So sometimes you'll have people not aware of work we've done in other areas because the work of Amnesty is so broad and so fast. So the fundamental theory of change of Amnesty, how we bring change to society and bring change to injustice, is a combination of several factors. We're mostly known for our campaigns, but really it is a combination of a few things. First, it's facts, right? So research. We work on elements that we have ourselves research, first-hand research, not something that we've heard from another report, not something that we've heard another organization do. Of course, all of that informs our work. But our research, and that's often why it takes so long to come out, is always first-hand account research. And so when we publish, for instance, the genocide report in Gaza, that was the result of Amnesty collected evidence. And that's what makes our research so important, so valuable, and so respected. So number one is research. But we know that research alone, bringing facts to light alone, is not enough. If it were, my goodness, what a different world we will be in, right? So in addition to research, we advocate. So we use the content of that research, the content of the facts we have gathered ourselves with our trained, staff and team across the world. We use that to go to the decision makers and say, here is the evidence of what you're not doing. You need to do this differently. Okay, that's called advocacy. Some people call that lobbying. We call that advocacy. In some cases, advocacy alone, research and advocacy alone will lead to change. That has happened. It continues to happen. Sometimes you'll have a government official who will be responsive, who will realize, who will say, we actually did not know this. We can fix this, right? And then we don't need to even go to campaigning. So that is the work that is often invisible. The advocacy work will not be known by the public. There's a lot of behind closed door work that happens to drive change forward. And that never gets advertised. It doesn't get a reel or a video, and so nobody knows about it. But it is driving change. And then you have the third pillar, which is when we've brought the facts forward, when we've told authorities, here's what's happening. Because, and I should have mentioned this, for every research that we do, we always contact the relevant authority to have them have their say about that issue. So if we come, I saw that one of the issues you're very concerned with in Saskatchewan is housing. Let's say we issue a report on housing. We will go and share those findings before we release that report with the local government and give them what's called a right of reply. And we will include that in the report itself. Okay? So when the facts have not worked and the advocacy has not worked, we mobilize our incredible people power and campaign. And so now you have a combination of the facts are clear, the authorities are aware and have been engaged, and the people who have elected the decision makers are calling on them to change. And it's that those three elements combined which make Amnesty so effective and so powerful. And often the change that you see happening, whether it's in law or in policy, is the result of years and years of work and the efforts of so many. The last piece that I want to mention, when none of these work, or when you are in, let's say, a country or under a government that is not responsive at all, is litigation. We go to the court when everything else has failed. And so, for instance, our colleagues in the US right now, who are facing a government that will not listen to facts, that will not respond to advocacy, that doesn't care that much about campaigning, are relying more and more on the courts to achieve the results that they want to have. So it's typically those three, and sometimes that fourth leg, which is litigation, which together create this powerful theory of change that Amnesty is quite unique with. There are other human rights organizations, but that do not have the campaigning strength that we have. And then there are campaigning organizations that do not necessarily have the credibility of the facts that we bring. And it's that blend that truly makes Amnesty incredibly unique. And the fact that we do that around the world on issues, on a range of issues globally, from gender-based violence to disability to access to food and shelter, to migrant rights, to the right to use your language, to the freedom of protest around the world, around the clock, throughout the year. That's what makes us truly incredibly unique.
Thank you so much for explaining that. Going off the numerous issues that Amnesty works with and the requirement for campaigning to have a lot of people behind it advocating for those issues. The landscape of this advocacy is changing every day. And I've noticed a trend of activists focusing on single issue topics that they're passionate about. And I think that can cause an aversion to a multi-issue organization like Amnesty when they're looking for places to volunteer. This method has its benefits for those activists by managing where they can focus their limited capacity on what they care about the most. But how does Amnesty support the efforts of independent grassroots organizations founded by single interest?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think that both have to exist, right? You need to have organizations, movements, grassroots movements that are focused on a single issue because they build the deep knowledge, the deep relationships that are needed. You also need to have the same organizations or movements at a local level, right? Amnesty is not going to know about and should not need to know about everything that happens in every municipality around the world. It's impossible. We would be setting up ourselves for failure. I think that, and then you need the bigger, the much bigger boat that is Amnesty, that is able to make the local issue global. So the two have to exist. And I think that the key is collaboration. And that's been a huge emphasis for me, at least for my term since I've been with Amnesty Canada, is really for us to really grasp the fact that it doesn't always have to be Amnesty doing these things. We can share the tools, the knowledge that we have with grassroots organizations, and also get out of their way sometimes. Because when we come in, we often take a lot of space. We're very visible, we're very branded. Let them do their work. But when the issue has really failed to progress at a local level and at a bigger level, that's when sometimes we can be helpful, because we can take it to a different audience, right? So take the case of the Wet'suwet'en, for instance, a case that is very local and that had a lot of national prominence, certainly at some point, but where the attention was shifting, and now given not only national but global prominence. Okay, so I think it really is about that collaboration and us building the relationships to stay in touch with as many grassroots local movements as possible. And people should be free to come to Amnesty and do some things and go to their other movements and do their thing. I think we need to really be very clear about that. It's not a religion where you only do Amnesty work. You should feel free to go and do other pieces of work in other organizations that may be devoting more time or resources to a particular issue. But the strength and the power of being with Amnesty is that that issue that you're bringing will have a wider, bigger impact, and that you two get to work on other issues as well. And so I think we really just need to get better at integrating the two, and as much as possible sharing the knowledge that we have acquired, because Amnesty alone cannot and will not change the world. But the more we provide the tools to others of things we've learned how to do best, the more we will collectively move forward. That's my personal philosophy.
Yeah, that's wonderful. If there's a group that is seeking Amnesty's help on a certain issue, what is the mechanism by which they can seek out resources or support from Amnesty?
Great question. If it's a group at that's working at a very local level, let's say a particular city, or sometimes it could be a province, but if it's within a city and we have an Amnesty group, very often that's the first point of contact, right? And often our local activists and members have a ton of, knowledge and resources that they can share back. I have to be very honest, there's no way that the Secretariat can take on all the requests that we have, and we have to manage that expectation, right? But another way, sometimes we often hear from a range of organizations and people who come to us at the Secretariat and say, hey, could you help us with this issue? And sometimes, even if we can't do a report on the issue, we're not able to do something major, there will be resources that we're able to share. Sometimes it's sharing a connection. Here are other groups that are working on the same thing. Here, come join this group where we are advocating collectively on this issue. There's always something that we can provide. So I would say first, going to the local group and local members and local activists. Second, coming to the Secretariat. Through either our campaigners, if it's a specific issue, or just through our membership team, or even just our general, we get requests coming to our general email, which I redirected to the right team.
In terms of human rights work, have you noticed that there's a lot of change in the way that campaigning is happening because of things like a global pandemic and the way a changing online trend will affect how people are communicating? And how do you keep up with all of this to ensure that you're continuing to campaign in a way that gets the information out?
Yes, that is the greatest challenge. I think that's a very, very pertinent question. You're very right. So we have never been as informed as we are today. You open your phone and you have an avalanche of news, of information from around the globe. And I think we have to name the fact that people are truly overwhelmed. They feel that they do not know what to do. And very often the response is, let me just move away from that. They shut down from it and just want to focus on their own immediate environment that they can control. And that's a legitimate, response. So I have seen that people are increasingly, a lot of people are disengaging, especially, I would say, the 30 to 55 group. The more, and sometimes even 25 to 55, the more people get busy with their personal lives, people have kids, people have careers, and so on and so forth, the more they feel overwhelmed by what's happening in the world and, have a sense of, I can't manage that. So that's one thing I've observed. The other one is because, again, things are so available online, because it's so easy to repost, to like, to share, there is a sense of like social media activism that can make you feel that you are an activist because you've liked something, you've reposted, you shared. And so that gives you a sense that you are really engaged, or you're reading the various things that are online. And so you feel that you are tuned in. But maybe you're not taking the additional steps that are needed to drive the change, right? Maybe you're not going to meet your local official and having a face-to-face conversation with your local official, right? You're not bringing 5 friends or 10 friends together to talk about, hey, what are we going to do about this issue? Okay. You're not attending a protest, or you're not doing other forms of campaigning, and you feel satisfied by your online actions. So that's the other thing, is that it can impair actual or other forms of activism. And so the challenge for us, for all of us, for all of you who are on this call, all 28 of us who are on this call, is to really stay engaged, find ways of staying engaged and making people want to take another action beyond, what's online. And I think that starts by just being together. The pandemic has really, I think, made us isolated us more. We've become comfortable in our little bubbles, and we don't want to get out of our bubbles. And it's time for us to expand the bubble, to go back to being together in person, and to start doing things together. Obviously, this group is doing it, but we need to do that more and more and more, which is why we're thinking more and more about organizing spaces for people to be together in person and do things. And that's why Right for Rights, for instance, is a great like a great way of doing that. But we definitely have to expand and meet that challenge.
Yeah, we have a pretty good question from the chat that I think can help us expand on some of this. Janet asks, can you tell us some of the highlights of the work done by the Canadian section in the past year?
Yes, I'm thinking about that because we have an AGM coming up soon, so I have to put our report together. Some of the most impactful work that we have done has been on refugees and migrants through not only the immigration detention, but now the temporary foreign workers work that we have done, which is already beginning to yield some results, putting that issue really front and center across Canada. The level of global engagement we've created around the Wet'suwet'en case, the relationship and the solidarity that we have demonstrated to them has been nothing short of outstanding. And then I want to talk about the the genocide in Gaza, Israel's genocide in Gaza, which may seem because not enough because we haven't achieved the end of the genocide, which is what we all want, may seem as though no progress was made. But actually, if you think back at where Canada stood in October 2023 and where Canada is now, there's a lot. Of course, it's insufficient, but there's a lot of progress that we have made in increasing the political cost for Canada to continue supporting the policies of the government of Israel. So yes, Canada is not yet fully where we need it to be, but Canada has, stopped exporting some weapons. That is progress versus continuing to export weapons as the position of the country was, a year and a half ago. The increasing recognition coming short of the word genocide, and which is where we need Canada to be, but the recognition of the massive violations of human rights that are occurring. Canada continuing to fund UNRWA, despite after having withdrawn from funding UNRWA and continuing to share humanitarian aid. There are areas where Canada is doing absolutely poorly, particularly in repatriating Canadian Palestinians or people or Palestinians in general in Canada, or protecting the right to protest on this issue in Canada. But there's also been some advancement that I think, and this is the challenge always of every activist, that I think we don't get to see because we're looking at the end result that we want, and it's often hard to see the progress that we've made across throughout the years. And then I'd say also on the issue of racial justice, in which I'm really glad that we now have we have a racial justice campaigner. We have built incredible relationships particularly with the Black community across Canada, and even more so in the past year. And activism and organizing begins always with relationships. And so these things that we have built over the years will continue to propel Canada to Amnesty Canada to be much more impactful in the future.
Wonderful. Going back to thinking about how people are overwhelmed and disengaging from advocacy, it has seen in Canada that more and more people are engaging in political discourse in Canada. And this can be inferred from the record voter turnout at advanced polling in the recent federal election. Of course, as an organization, Amnesty is nonpartisan, impartial, and independent of any government, political ideology, economic interest, or religion. But my question is, has society in Canada become more divisive? Has there been a trend towards polarizing topics that's affecting the way that we can campaign and share information and facts about issues?
Yes, the short answer is yes. Definitely, Canadian society has become more polarized. It was very obvious in the last election results, where we are now in what a lot of people are defining as a two-party system, and so closely together. So clearly you see a nation divided in two very different visions of society. But those positions are more hardened than ever. They are more at ends one from the other than they ever were before. And polarization is a goal and a tactic that is often used by anti-rights movements. So I think we at Amnesty have to see it as the result of efforts made by certain groups, movements, to truly divide the society. So I would not say that we have polarizing topics. I think that the society has become polarized to the point that it can no longer discuss topics which it does not necessarily always agree on, right? So it is the sign of a healthy society when you can have a fulsome discussion or conversation on fundamental things. Let's take trans rights, for instance, right? We have moved now to a point where people cannot even have a conversation or hear one another. That to me is very concerning. The fact that we have increasingly groups that think alike and will only sort of move with people who think alike. And that leaves a fractured society. And so you have these bubbles that are emerging and that are not able to hear one another. And that's concerning. But as I said, it is a tactic. It's part of the authoritarian tactics that have been used and deployed, not just in Canada, but in the rest of Europe, in Eastern Europe as well, in part of Latin America, and that is also fostered through social media and often misinformation and disinformation. So you have narratives that are so extreme. Look at the conversation on refugees, for instance. You have narratives that are becoming so extreme about refugees, and that are therefore creating a polarizing environment on an issue that should be discussed quite freely and openly across society. So that's very concerning. And we are thinking about it quite strongly within the Amnesty movement as a whole. We had recently met with the directors of Amnesty across Americas, and it was clearly a trend in many countries, including Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, and elsewhere. And I think the solution to that, because we are that movement that tackles all of these issues together, is that we really have to work on how we communicate and how we share our messages back to people. We have to bring people back to facts. We have to bring people back from, to see the humanity of one another, simply the human face of the other human being, and strip away the labels. Behind the name refugee, migrant, trans is a human being, a human person, and our work is to really push through those barriers and ensure that we still see each other as people. That is going to be a big battle moving forward, not just for Amnesty Canada, but for all Amnesty sections.
Thank you. Moving into more of a direct topic that is important in Saskatchewan. In March, Regina City Council declared a citywide houselessness crisis. Councillor David Froh cited a recent point and count that cataloged at least 824 people living in a state of homelessness in Regina in a single night, showing that that number has nearly doubled in a 3-year period. And the count in Saskatoon was nearly 1,500, a third of which were children and youth. My first question, as an organization that specializes in human rights, is a home a basic right?
Yes, 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 yes. It's a basic human right. The right to adequate housing is a fundamental right enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25 of the UDHR, also enshrined in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and a range of other instruments. And yes, a resounding yes, housing is absolutely a basic human right. There's no question about that. And there are, many advocates who, including the former Special Rapporteur on Housing, who have been doing a lot of work to try and get the Canadian government at the federal, but also provincial level, to truly tackle housing as a human right. However, unfortunately, that has not been the approach until now. I think now we're beginning to see governments understand how big of an issue this is, how the lack of investment in adequate and affordable housing, it has truly fully impacted society. And political parties are beginning to feel that really clearly, but there's no doubt about it. Housing is indeed a human right. You have the right to have adequate levels of shelter, of food, of a decent standard of living. This is fundamental. It's not a nice to have or a plus to have or something that you deserve if you've worked hard enough, right? And so, and that should be, that is the responsibility of the government. Federal, provincial, municipal government. It is first and foremost the responsibility of governments to ensure that all citizens have adequate housing.
Thank you. I'm wondering if policies that in practice criminalize homelessness, is that violating a person's right to shelter? For example, architecture that's designed for discomfort in public places, policies that prevent religious buildings from sheltering people, and police intervening to dismantle tent encampments where people are living, as well as the cease and desist letters that people are receiving for building tiny mobile shelters. Is that a violation of their human rights?
Yes, absolutely. So criminalizing houselessness is a violation of human rights. And this, again, has also been made very evident by, and has been condemned by various UN special rapporteurs and various human rights bodies in Canada and around the world. Yes, if as a government you have failed to make adequate housing available to your citizens, and your citizens are now resorting to all sorts of methods to be able to house themselves, and you are criminalizing them for finding a solution to a problem that you never addressed, you are absolutely in the wrong. And so the solution is, once again, to get governments to prioritize housing and to prioritize adequate and affordable housing, okay, to ensure that everybody truly enjoys their right to adequate housing.
Before we move on to some other issues, I want to encourage the chat to get active in talking, typing amongst yourselves. So I'm going to ask everyone in the chat to let us know what your favorite basic human right is, as if you had a favorite color. Let us know. So a friend of mine, her name is Aaliyah, she has concerns within her own community, and she posed a question I'd like to ask in her words. The Qu'Appelle Valley holds immense cultural, spiritual, and environmental importance for many First Nations in Saskatchewan, with traditional practices like ceremony, land-based education, and harvesting still central to life in the region. Despite this, there are ongoing concerns about land development, environmental degradation, and lack of proper consultation with Indigenous communities. These lands and practices are meant to be protected under both Canadian and international human rights law. How is Amnesty International Canada supporting the protection of Indigenous rights in areas like the Qu'Appelle Valley, and what is being done to ensure that First Nations have real authority in land stewardship and that their right to free, prior, and informed consent is fully respected?
Oh, thank you for that question. What's the name of your friend?
Aaliyah.
Thank you, Aaliyah, for that question. A very, very pertinent question. And the last words that you said there are the most important: the right to free, prior, and informed consent. So which is fundamental. The right to free, prior, and informed consent is enshrined in the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which Canada finally adopted and has been ascended into Canadian law. The issue, however, is that that right has not yet been enshrined in legislation. And so we have the UDHR, which asserts free, prior informed consent. But then you have legislation which has not caught up with the UDHR, which is where a lot of indigenous peoples and communities and their lands are often getting stuck. And so there's been a practice now where governments or corporations will consult, and often the duty to consult is becoming more and more respected. That varies very much, but there's an understanding more and more that needs to be respected. But it's consulting for the sake of consulting. And then you end up doing what you'd like to do in the end. That's not the spirit of free, prior, informed consent. Consent means that you have the full consent of the indigenous community. And that consent was not coerced, okay? That consent was sought before you started anything that you wanted to do. And that the community really understands the impact of what's going to happen on their territory. That's what free, prior, and informed consent means. And the truth is that until that's legislated, people will continue to interpret it as they wish, or companies and governments will interpret it as they wish. We'll often talk to, and this is where even the history, that this has been the history of colonialism, the divide and conquer, right? So you'll talk to a small number within that community, and you may get their consent because you have coerced it. You've offered, some benefits to a few members, and then you take that as consent. That's not consent. So in terms of what we're doing about it, we're working, pushing, campaigning, advocating for the recognition of the right to free, prior, and informed consent in legislation, and including in provincial legislation. That's been one of our key calls throughout, even echoed by our Global Secretary General when she came to Ottawa this week. We are really pushing that. And in the so now we have a Liberal government elected. On their platform, there was a commitment to advance that, but we're pushing it harder to ensure that it is actually legislated. Because once it is, it will help resolve some of the issues, like the issue that Alia is talking about. For us, that's one of the most effective ways of doing that, because to be realistic, we're not going to be able to. We can, of course, work with some communities, but the right is violated across the country. We're not going to be able to do that across the country. It's by getting to the root of it and really ensuring that that is changed and applied in legislation that will be able to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples and protect the environment at the same time. So that's how we're tackling it.
Can people who really care about this issue help Amnesty with that mission to legislate the free, prior, and informed consent?
So one of the most effective ways of doing that is, and I can't emphasize that enough, is talking to your local officials, putting pressure on your local officials, particularly if they happen to belong to the party in power. Is really putting that pressure as much as possible. But even if they do not belong to the party in power, talking to your local official regardless will raise that awareness with that local official and making it a local issue, really being able to mobilize people in your community, in your group, to really get your local official understand that this is an issue you care about deeply. We have so much power as citizens and people who elect these people in power, and your local official is bound to listen to you and to listen to groups of you. So I think that's one very effective way to really leverage and to hold your local official to account. And then take that local organizing one step further, at the provincial level, for instance, challenging your provincial officials to ensure that is enshrined in the provincial legislation. So there's one thing about the federal legislation, it's another about provincial legislation. And there we see a range of differences between provinces, right? So legislation in BC is different from Saskatchewan, is different from Quebec and Ontario. So how much pressure can you try and exercise on your province, the province of Saskatchewan? And that's, these are some of the ways that you can really engage at your local level, and ensuring that it's not just your typical group of, let's say, of Amnesty activists who are obviously already committed, but that the issue is well understood by others. I really fundamentally believe that on this issue of free, prior, and informed consent, if more Canadians truly understood what it is and what continues to happen, I believe that there will be much more support for this issue. So it is our responsibility to make sure that our neighbors, the people around us, our peers, our colleagues, understand what this issue is and what it would mean to them, right? Because what it means is someone comes into your home and decides to do what they wish in your own home. No one would be in agreement with that. And I think the more we get people to see that this is an issue that still needs to be changed, the more progress we'll make. I'm finding that outside of Amnesty activists, grassroots mobilized structures, a lot of Canadians still think that the bulk of Indigenous rights issues were in the past and that they are still not continuing today. I still see that very much, and there's a big gap that we have to bridge and to get people to see that the injustices were not happening in the past. They're still ongoing today, and you can do something about it, right? If you really feel terrible about the past, you can do something about what's going on today, and you can have impact.
Someone from the chat asked a relevant question, stating that there are former provincial ministers of government who have said something along the lines of, when asked about talking about Indigenous groups and negotiating over provincial resources, a minister said, "Why bother? They'll just say no." Are statements like that to be taken seriously? And is there something that human rights defenders can do in cases like this?
Well, I think it's very telling if you have thankfully, this is a former provincial minister, but one can imagine that the current folks in governments who have the same perspective, that's very problematic, right? Let's not forget that there was a time in Canadian history where that thinking was very valid. Why bother to ask to take over the land of Indigenous peoples? They will say no anyway. But the tide has turned, and history proves that we can make issues that seem impossible and difficult and unchangeable, we can actually change them. So I would say we should take that seriously. The fact that he said so is serious. We can assume that there are some people who think that way. Thankfully, I think they are becoming a minority. But he said out loud what many may be thinking, in their heads, and what has become politically incorrect to say out loud. And so it is our job to make it costly for those in power to make or think that way, to make that kind of statement or to think that way. If the Indigenous people say no, then it is a no, and we have to uphold that decision. There's no way around it. And what I am finding, what I'm observing more and more, is people have understood that now they kind of need to consult Indigenous people, so they'll find a way to do it so that the outcome is still what they want. So let's find a way to talk to some Indigenous people who will get us to do what we want. What has not yet been understood is we cannot even plan to do this if there is no consent from Indigenous communities that are affected. A no means no, same as bodily autonomy, without consent, there's nothing that you can do. No means no. And we have to, we have to keep pushing. We have to make it politically costly. And we have to educate the public more and more to understand that we can't just say land acknowledgements and say we are on this territory and and do this performative things if we're not respecting the fundamental rights of Indigenous peoples today, right? The work is not in the past, the work is before us right now. And so we have to get better at pushing back and are getting as many people as possible to understand what the concern is. And just before I wrap up on that, very often there is a conflict between economic gains and the rights of Indigenous peoples. But that has been the conflict. It has been the story of colonization. Colonization is about me taking over your land because I see some economic benefit for me, because I'm going to be able to extract something from the land. I'm going to be able to do something that will serve my economic interests. So we should not be surprised by the conflict. And we really need to have people see that you can be economically prosperous while also ensuring that Indigenous people's rights are respected. And let's not forget that Indigenous peoples themselves want to be economically prosperous and well off as well. So they would not refuse a project that would benefit them. If they're refusing a project, it means that it is harmful to them, and most likely it is harmful for the rest of us. It's harmful to the environment, and it's harmful to the entire community. I am yet to see an Indigenous community that has refused a project simply without any valid reason. I have not seen any, and I think it would be hard to find one. So we have to trust and respect the no and build a culture of of consent.
Thank you so much. Saskatchewan has a vibrant history of Ukrainian settlers immigrating to the prairies, and the culture weaves through the fabric of what Saskatchewan culture feels like. So for many who have lived in Saskatchewan for a while, even generations, Ukraine feels close to home. And for refugees fleeing the ongoing Russian invasion, Ukraine still is home. From my conversation with a friend who immigrated from Ukraine, she asked, and she told me that she believes that not a lot of Ukrainians really are aware of Amnesty and the involvement that it has in the situation. But she asked, when will Amnesty take a more active position in supporting whose human rights have been violated by Russia? And when will the children stolen by Russia return home?
So Amnesty has been very active on Ukraine, and perhaps this links to your earlier comment, right, around the things that we work on, but people may not be aware of. So there was Amnesty actually worked on children, the abduction of children. Amnesty also worked on seniors and elders whose rights were also being violated as a result of the aggression on Ukraine by Russia. And after a pause, Amnesty Ukraine section had paused for a moment after the war, but has since reopened and continues to do so much tremendous and remarkable work on pushing for the full respect of rights in Ukraine. So there is so much that's being done, and I would recommend going to our Amnesty Ukraine page or the section of Ukraine on our website, which will give your friend all the latest reports that we've done and the push that we're making. obviously this is being undermined so much by geopolitics, right? So when we also what happened with President Trump and President Zelensky in the Oval Office, we are all witnessing how much the United States has turned and is now more and more supportive of Russia, and what that does to the sovereignty of Ukraine. And so we are doing our part, but make no mistake, this is not something that Amnesty alone can resolve, right? If the Russian aggression on Ukraine continues and is not checked by the biggest powers, including the United States, it is going to continue to be very difficult to protect the rights of Ukrainians. So I share the frustration of your friend. We are, of course, these violations are still ongoing and they risk to continue in the coming weeks and months with the level of impunity that has been afforded to Russia by the United States. But we have to keep pushing regardless. We have to push particularly European countries to continue to be firm in the support of Ukraine and Ukrainian rights. Right now, that's the only counterbalance that there is to what the United States is doing. And we have to continue to make, the case and pushing for, the respect of the rights of children, elders, women, and all ranges of Ukrainian society. So it is ongoing work. It is extremely frustrating to see the level of, to see the collapse of international law in, obviously Russia and Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and many other places. And I think the backdrop of all of this is that our world is changing. And we continue to push as much as we can, but we are not the ultimate decision makers, right? We make the issues as visible as possible, but there is a role that states have to play. And so, I'll just pause here and say that in terms of Amnesty's work, there's so many efforts that continue to happen, and especially our Ukrainian team is very engaged and very dedicated and working very closely with Ukrainian civil society to continue to push for respect of rights.
Thank you. With the increasing escalation of genocide perpetuated by Israel against Palestinians in occupied Palestinian territory, what is Amnesty Canada doing currently advocating to the Canadian government to prevent the Canadian government from financially supporting war criminals like Benjamin Netanyahu, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court?
Yes, we're doing a range of things. One is to ensure that any arms exports to Israel is fully canceled. So Canada has canceled its new arms permits to Israel. However, former permits, at least there's no clear transparency around the previous permits that were issued. And then we're pushing and to ensure that all permits are canceled. That's the first one, to ensure that no Canadian weapons are contributing to the genocide, whether they're going directly to Israel or whether they're going through the United States, which is what has been happening. We need to ensure that that stops, and we are constantly pushing, particularly Global Affairs Canada and Canadian authorities on this, and we did that again this week. The other thing that we are pushing for is obviously for Canada to recognize that what's happening is indeed a genocide. We heard the Prime Minister before he became Prime Minister, make a reference to that in his debate and correcting himself and saying that the word was too political, and we need to ensure we're pushing Canadian authorities by giving them our legal analysis to realize that this is not a matter of opinion. No, we did not arrive to the conclusion of genocide because we woke up one day and thought, well, this sounds like a genocide. It is a genocide. We have a 300 pages report that documents and that argues, including a huge chapter on intent, that clearly demonstrates that what's happening is a genocide. And that requires a response from state. So we can't keep having the Canadian government say that we need to wait for the ICJ's response and that it is the ICJ to decide whether this is a genocide or not. No, the Genocide Convention is clear. If there's a clear risk of genocide occurring, every signatory to the convention has a duty to prevent it, period. That's it. It's as clear as day. So we are pushing the Canadian government to continue to change its analysis and its review of what is happening as actual genocide. And then we're also pushing Canada to commit to, and particularly the Carney government, we've really started on that really strongly, to commit that should any of the perpetrators or should Netanyahu ever set foot in Canada, that we would abide by the ICJ and ICC arrest warrants, and that Canada will uphold international law impartially, even when it applies to its former allies or bilateral allies. So that's a commitment that we want to have firmly made by Canada. Canada has, for those who follow this closely, you've seen that the language has shifted over time. And now Canada says it will abide by international law. What we want Canada to do is be even more clear and say that should anyone who has an arrest warrant, including Netanyahu, set foot in Canada, Canada will indeed exercise its duty under international law. So, you know, a lot there that we continue to push, and this falls under the category of work that is both seen and unseen. There's work that's visible and work that happens behind the scenes, the pressure that we exercise constantly, the engagements we have constantly with Canadian officials to be able to get to that result, which is a lot of what my work is about.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned that Amnesty does all of its own research, and that would be the research that went into the 300-page report. Jim from the chat, he asks, has Amnesty lost any researchers who investigate the situation in Gaza?
You mean lost their lives? No, we have not. We had one person who was based in Gaza. He's a field worker based in Gaza, with whom we lost contact at some point, but that has been restored. So I would say that no, we haven't lost no one has lost their lives, thankfully. But I want to highlight that our team, our global team who has worked on this report, particularly our Middle East team and our Ramallah team, is profoundly, and I'm going to tear up just thinking about it, profoundly affected by the work that they do. So for over the past year and a half, they have documented day in, day out, right, the atrocities that were happening. Because remember, we use firsthand research. This means that we have to validate every picture, every statement made by public officials has to be verified by our teams, by our crisis teams and our verification teams. These are people who are from the region and sometimes who are Palestinians themselves and who are reviewing this information daily in and out, listening to statements made by Israeli officials, listening to the cries of Palestinian mothers and children, you know, keeping up with this unending, relentless assault on human rights and genocide on a daily basis. They have worked night and day, and they are, I think, forever changed by this genocide. They are broken, they are burnt out. And we still expect more of them, right? We still expect them to give us the latest analysis and the latest research when they themselves are at the forefront of this. And so I just want to salute my colleagues and our colleagues who are doing just, you know, incredible work at a huge personal cost. And just colleagues across the Amnesty movement who are doing this work in the most challenging circumstances. Human rights work is not easy work. It is hard work. And I don't know anyone within the Amnesty movement who doesn't work so hard to bring these injustices to light and to bring change forward. So I did want to say that, because as though we have not, although we have not lost lives, we've had a number of them truly break down. I think we have a number of them who are on medical leaves. Some of them have left because it's too much, and others are just in pieces. And that's just the truth.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that kind of behind the scenes look at how important all of the people are who help keep Amnesty going and keep it the reliable, trusting organization that we have around the world. In Saskatchewan, often tariffs are the first concern raised regarding the current United States administration. Is there a risk of escalating tensions between the two countries that could impact the human rights of those living in Canada? And how can people protect themselves in a time of economic conflict?
Yes, valid questions. We certainly live in the most interesting of times. Is there a risk of escalation between the US and Canada? I think that the Canadian government is well aware of that risk and is working as much as it can to mitigate that risk. The risk with the Trump administration is that you don't know what you're up against. You don't actually know, you cannot plan. This isn't a completely unpredictable character in administration. And so it's hard to know and hard to plan if you don't know what your counterpart is going to do. And so I think if there's one thing we have to brace ourselves for, it's really uncertainty, right? Becoming just a little bit more comfortable with uncertainty. I think the Canadian government is working night and day to ensure that that this does not blow up into something that's much more severe, that there is a conclusion to the tariffs, that the attack on Canada's sovereignty does not come to fruition. The meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Carney on Tuesday seemed to indicate that we might be at the beginning of some form of negotiation or peaceful outcome, although that's still unclear. So I can't answer that question. That really is, I don't know if anyone can answer that question except President Trump himself. But in terms of the potential risk to human rights defenders, I'm actually more concerned about human rights defenders in the United States. I'm very, very concerned about those who are fighting for justice in the US, who now have to watch what they say, but becoming much, much more careful about what they can say publicly. Many of our, sister organizations in the US have lost their funding, or they are worried about losing their charitable status, including our own Amnesty section in the US. And so because of that, we are in a unique position, because we're not government funded at all. We're in a unique position where we can say things that other organizations can't say. But, increasingly, US human rights defenders and social justice advocates and so on and so forth are becoming quiet or will need protection. And that's one of the things that we talked to the Canadian government already about. Like, we have mechanisms in place in Canada to protect human rights defenders at risk, but I don't think Canada had ever thought that we'll have to protect American human rights defenders at risk. And this is a new environment in which we have to think about this quite carefully. There are people who have already come to Canada. There's this professor on fascism who has now decided to move to Canada because he's concerned about his own safety and his ability to continue to speak freely. So the right of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, all these rights are under assault in the US. And so right now, I think I'm more concerned about those than human rights defenders in Canada. But that may be an outcome that, that may change in the future, which is why we have to push the new, Carney administration to make human rights front and center in the coming years. It's one of the reasons why Agnès Calamar, our global history, was here. We're trying to make the case to Canada that as the US retracts on its, promise or values, even if it didn't always abide by them, of human rights, Canada has to step up and has to fill that void. And Canada has to strongly defend, uphold human rights, international law, and human rights defenders at risk. So it is going to be a bit of an uncertain time. I'm a little bit more hopeful now when it comes to the Canada-US relation, but we just have to brace ourselves. And I want to add, I'd like to add this. What's happening in the United States is not just due to Trump. Trump is Trump, will always be Trump, but Trump is a manifestation of a bigger issue that we are seeing occurring across the world, in Europe, in Argentina, we saw it with Bolsonaro in Brazil, and these seeds of these anti-right authoritarian practices are also present here in Canada. And so part of our work is beyond everything that, all the theatrics between Canada and the US, we have to make sure that these seeds do not grow here in Canada. I was very concerned to see that the demographic between 18 to 24-year-old young men, for instance, were clearly very polarized and had moved not just to the right, but really were responding and are responding to an anti-right narrative. So we need to get those constituencies back to care about the humanity of one another, to care about human rights, to understand that there's no such thing as me enjoying my rights if my neighbor is not enjoying theirs, that we are safer as a country and as a community when all of us are safe. And that, it's an illusion to think that one country or one person can be well on their own. Our greatest safety is ensuring that those around us and those around the world are safe. That's a message that we need to reiterate more and more and more. And we have a lot of work cut out to do. And that's all, thanks to all of you on this call. It's a mission that we share and that we have to get stronger at, better at. We have to talk to those who do not agree with us and have them see our humanity once again. So yes, let's gather among ourselves, but let's also talk to those who are thinking differently, who we need to bring back, because what's happening today is that the anti-right movements have learned from the rights movements. They have learned the mobilizing, the organizing strategies of the human rights movements, whether it's the labor movement or the civil rights movement, the racial justice rights movements, and are now using that to take us backwards. That is what we need to resist. And we need to go back to talking to one another and rebuilding a robust movement for human rights for all, not some, all.
Thank you so much, Ketty. I think I have one more question myself. If my moderators could choose a question from the chat to address afterwards, pick one that you feel would be great to close out with, that would be wonderful. But I want to ask about the relationship between the United States and El Salvador that enforces the arbitrary detention of thousands of people and detains them without due process. By the Safe Third Country Agreement between Canada and the United States asserts that the United States is a safe country for refugees. By upholding this policy in Canada, we're preventing people from claiming asylum in Canada should they cross into Canada from the United States in some situations. Does this make Canada complicit in cases where an asylum seeker is deported from the United States to CCOT in El Salvador?
Yes, yes, it does. Which is why we've worked so hard for so many years, and especially now, to get Canada to rescind the safe third country agreement. We cannot have a safe third country agreement when the third country is not safe. So there is no doubt about this, and we just again this week, we're reiterating this to Canadian authorities. Canada has no business being in a safe third country agreement with the United States, particularly not at this time when the violations against refugees and asylum seekers are so evident and so stark. So yeah, the short answer is yes, absolutely. And we need to continue putting as much pressure as possible on Canada to ensure that Canada comes out of that agreement. At the same time, it is a challenging issue, right? Because Canada is in the middle of negotiations with the US. You have sort of the sword of the tariffs hanging on you as if you're a Canadian official or prime minister. You're thinking about these tariffs, which could be doubled or so on and so forth. You've got that threat. And then you've got the general public, which has really shifted and is no longer so open to having, because of these narratives that have been perpetuated, no longer open to having refugees and asylum seekers come to the country. So I'm not trying to picture this as a black and white issue. It's complex, right? But our role as a human rights organization and movement is to make it abundantly clear to Canadian authorities and Canadians in general that we cannot close our doors or deport people back to a country that we know will deport them again into abhorrent conditions, such as the ones in Salvador. And El Salvador is one example. Tomorrow, President Trump will make an alliance with another country or another one and continue to deport people this way. So we need to resist that. Absolutely, fully. Amnesty is at the forefront of it. We've released so many statements. We're pushing against it, but it's going to be, it will have to be a collective effort from all of us to push that back. I could see in our meetings that we had with various Canadian officials that this is an issue that they are beginning to take a bit more seriously, that they are now aware of how unsafe the US is. But we have to increase the pressure and keep at it.
Wonderful. The question from the chat is from David. Can you comment on Canada's very different reactions to Ukrainian and Sudanese refugees?
Yes. And I would say Ukrainian and Sudanese refugees, but also Ukrainian and Palestinian refugees, Ukrainian and Afghan refugees. What we saw with Ukrainian refugees was an incredible response from Canada, which made us realize that there were options, there are solutions, right? The Canadian government is able to come up with the right solutions, the right frameworks, in a short amount of time to respond to a crisis when it thinks and feels that this is a crisis worth responding to. So, and I want to make that clear. Let's not, misunderstand this to say that we're critiquing the response of, of Canada towards Ukrainian refugees, but that should be the norm. If we can do that for Ukrainian refugees, why are we not doing that for Sudanese refugees, Afghan refugees, Palestinian refugees? Are these not human beings who have the same equal worth? Are we prioritizing human beings on what basis? The basis of the country they come from, the basis of the relationship, the bilateral relationship? That is what we have to push back on, right? If we can accelerate the process for someone to become a permanent resident, for someone to be relocated, for someone, like we saw things at the immigration department level that we had never seen before done for Ukrainian refugees. That means we can do them for other crises. Let's learn from that example and apply it to others. Otherwise, it's pure and simple discrimination. And we have to call it what it is. So my comment is that the response is unequal, unexplainably so, and that we have to keep pushing the Canadian government to have a standard response to every crisis, regardless of where it occurs, whether it's Rohingyas, whether it's Americans tomorrow, or Ukrainians, or Sudanese, or Mozambican, or wherever a human being is from, should not prohibit or dictate how we assist them, right? We respond to people on the basis of their humanity, universality of human rights. We all enjoy the same rights, regardless of where we come from. And that is what we want the Canadian government to do and to display in its policies towards those who are displaced at their most desperate hour.
Thank you for all of your wisdom, Ketty, and for sharing this time with me and these questions that a lot of people have been wanting to know more about. And thank you for agreeing to have this recorded so we can post it and have other people who couldn't be here at this time watch it later. To them, I would like to ask you to post in the comments what your favorite human right is, and we'll be watching out for that. But that's just all I have, and thank you so much, Ketty.
Thank you so much, Taylor. You were fantastic, and it was such a pleasure to be with you and with all of you. Thank you, and thank you for all that you do. We wouldn't be able to do it without you, so thank you so much. And let's keep fighting. The fight is only getting spicier. Let's get ready for it. Thank you.